Good evening, everyone. Myself, Saili Gupte. I will be your host for today's session. At the beginning, I would like to request all the participants to keep your camera and microphone off as this session will be live streamed on YouTube. Uh, to start with, I would like to brief you about the Mangrove Cell and Mangrove Foundation work. At the Mangrove Cell, Government of Maharashtra and Maharashtra Mangrove Foundation, we work towards the protection and conservation of mangrove and marine ecosystem of Maharashtra. We also promote research, sustainable livelihood activities, ecotourism, and strengthening of coastal communities by capacity building programs. From today, we are celebrating the Wildlife Week, which will be last from 1st October to the 8th October 2020. The Wildlife Week is celebrated all over the country to preserve the fauna, that is the animal life of India. It was first started in the year 1952 with the great vision of saving the life of animals and taking some critical steps to conserve them. In this inaugural session, we will be visiting the world of cetaceans with our today's guest speaker, Mr. Mihir Sure. He is a PhD student at the Center of Ecological Sciences, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, working on the population genetics, species delimitation, and biogeography of humpback dolphin along the entire coast of mainland India. He has been working on marine mammals since 2011, mostly on the west coast of India, specifically Maharashtra. Now, I would like to request Mr. Mihir to kindly take us to the world of cetaceans. Welcome, Mihir.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Uh, I'm clearly audible, right?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
audible.
So, all right. Yeah. Okay. What happened? Sorry. Yeah. So, let's start with the word cetaceans. What does it mean? I mean, cetaceans are just whales, dolphins, and porpoises. It's the family that they belong to. Like us, they're mammals. I mean, they might not look it because they are adapted to freshwater and marine habitats and their legs have turned into tails, but they're very much mammals. If you see sharks or bony fishes, their tails uh, are horizontal, whereas marine mammals flap their tails vertically, very much like our spine is. Like you wouldn't be able to bend sideways, but back in front we have more mobility because being mammals, their spines are very similar to ours. Also, I mean, they can't breathe underwater. They don't have gills like bony fishes or sharks do. They have blowholes, which are very similar to our nostrils. I mean, look at a whale's nose. It looks almost like a human nose. And interestingly, if you notice, the dolphin has only one blowhole. We'll come to that one later. You know, we see the whale spouting uh, in pictures and films, and people think that it's water being sprayed out. But it's not. It's just that the whale breathes out, and because there is so much volume of air, and that the air in the lungs is warm, it condenses. There's a bit of mucus and the water around its blowhole. That's what creates this spout that we see in whales. Now I'm going to talk about my team's work, which is the Konkan Cetacean Research Team in Maharashtra, but a large part of our focus has been in the Sindhudurg district of Maharashtra, which is the southernmost district. Uh, and I'm presenting this work on part of all of my colleagues. Uh, Here are the funders that had supported this work. So coming back to the area, this is the southernmost district along Maharashtra's coastline, about 121 kilometers of coastline, and it's got a lot of fisheries. There are artisanal and industrial fisheries, and there are marine mammals in the water. Here you see a dolphin interacting with a net early in the morning. So right in the beginning, we didn't have a lot of funds, and we had just seen dolphins in these waters and didn't find much information about them. And we thought the best way to get some info on these species would be to ask fishermen. They obviously go into the water every day. And we thought we could get a lot of information by just talking to these people, because going on a boat is expensive. It needs a lot of permits. It's difficult to do. But soon we realized that dolphins are not something the fishermen were particularly interested in. They were not target catch. If you ask a fisherman about the fish species that he catches, he knows its life history, he knows a lot of details about it. But the dolphins were just something in the environment, and their knowledge about it was limited. So we decided that to get more ecological data on dolphins, we needed to get on the water ourselves. So we rented a beat up old boat, modified it a little bit, so that we could sit on the front with a viewing platform and put a little shade for us, because we spent 14, 15 hours on the water a day. In the beginning, we did these across the gradient survey. So generally, marine mammals are distributed by depth. So to look at where what species were found, we had to survey across this depth. And these were long lines and very little was seen in them. But it gave us data as to the distribution of marine mammals. And then based on this, we put in a lot more effort in the area that we actually saw the marine mammals in, to utilize our resources to the fullest. We spent sometimes 14, 15 hours on the water a day. Rest of the time we slept on the boat, because she did a saintly 9 kilometers an hour. So what did we see in these waters? The most common species was the Indian Ocean humpback dolphin. And the second most common was the finless porpoise. Sorry for the really bad images of the porpoise, but that's all you see in the water. The first few times that we saw them, we weren't sure whether they were coconuts floating in the water or bits of tire. They just vanished before you even realized they're there. We have some, I don't know, 100,000 images of dolphins and some 4 images of porpoises. So that gives you an idea of how difficult they are to observe, and even more so to photograph. So we were counting how many dolphins were there, like the number of groups. So there were around 142 sightings. Now the group sizes were varied. The literature that we read said that these animals were found in pods of up to 30 animals. The maximum number we saw was 120. So this told us that these were rich waters. The rivers that flow from the Western Ghats were driving a large influx of nutrients, and this nutrient was able to support a large number of predators of these fish. Porpoises, on the other hand, were less frequently seen, but even for porpoises, we saw large groups, up to 55 animals. Generally, these animals are seen in much smaller groups of up to 6 or 8 animals. So, I mean, just to give you an idea, this is what a porpoise looks like, because what you see in the image is the head of the animal in the to the left and a part of the back in the right. Now that we found out what animals were found, where were they found? So we did surveys and we plotted sightings. Here is what we call a density map. This is the area that was most frequently used. What we realized soon is that the dolphin density spots nicely correlated with areas where there were estuaries. So these dolphins preferred to stay in areas where the nutrient influx was bringing in fish. A similar pattern was seen with porpoises, but they seem to be more concentrated in the central area. Also, their numbers were much lower, and they were sighted less frequently. When we looked at how these animals use this area, not just north-south, but depth-wise, there was a fair bit of overlap between porpoises and dolphins. They both preferred very shallow waters, about 10-ish meters in depth for dolphins and about 15 meters for porpoises. This is very close to the shore in Sindhudurg. If you guys have been out on the water there, it's about 2 kilometers of the shore. So as you can see, the dolphins preferred to be within a kilometer of the shore. The porpoises were a further bit spread out. Also, you'll see this little spike for the dolphin distribution when we look at how close they were to estuaries. Almost a lot of the sightings were within 4 kilometers of an estuary. What was very surprising though is that in spite of these two species, finless porpoises and humpback dolphins, sharing a lot of habitat, they were hardly ever seen together. I mean, in our 2.5 years in the water, we have seen porpoises and dolphins just once together. And that was also a very interesting incident where there was a dolphin pod to the right of our boat, and porpoise mother and calf was swimming from the left. And suddenly, at some point, about 100 meters off from our boat, the mother and calf dived in and vanished. So it seems like they might be avoiding the much larger humpback dolphins. Later, we read in papers that in Pakistan, where these animals also share habitat, there have been reports of humpback dolphins having killed porpoises, and it seems to be just aggression. They don't actually eat the species. So now that we found out where these animals are, what do they do there? We could not get any behavioral data on porpoises because we could hardly see them, but we did some detailed behavioral work on humpback dolphins. We classified four main behavioral states: foraging, where they're feeding or looking for food; socializing, which is interacting with conspecifics, their own species; traveling, which is directionally moving at a certain speed; and milling, which is they just hang around in an area. It's a little difficult to identify milling from traveling, but a bit of experience helps. Like in milling, they're not moving in a very definite way, they're sort of mingling in an area. And when we looked at how much time was spent in each of these behavior, we realized that about 50% or more of their time was spent foraging, which also explained why we saw density hotspots near estuaries, because this is probably the areas they're feeding in. This is really interesting to see that that much effort is invested into finding food. We also noticed some very interesting behavior. So we saw these two dolphins with something between them. They were really far from us, and we got some grainy images. This is a common behavior that we see, which is called a creche group. So generally, two adults will be escorting a calf. So the animal in the middle that you see here, the small tiny gray fin, is a calf, and the animals on both its sides are most probably either one mother and an aunt or other relative. This is something which is seen in a lot of marine mammal species, also something you must have seen on TV with elephants. But what was very interesting in this case is that the calf was not alive. We noticed this because one of the females, I'm assuming, kept prodding the dolphin out of the water, and the dolphin was floating belly up, and we noticed that its penis was popping out because there was gas buildup. So the animal obviously had been dead for some time. So this is called postmortem attentive behavior, where the dolphin actually grieves and cannot let go of its dead calf. In another incident, we saw a similar carcass, and this time we were able to retrieve it so that we could do some detailed work on what could have been the cause of death. What was very interesting to observe, you can notice based on us for scale that it's a tiny animal. It's barely more than a meter. So it's a young calf with no teeth erupted. We found milk in its stomach. But what was very intriguing was if you see these scar-like marks all over its body. So they were on its flipper, its snout, its tail, its dorsal fin. Now this behavior is called rake marking. Dolphins do that to each other, but it's something like a greeting or a friendly behavior of uh, tactile interaction. But you generally don't observe this with calves, and the rake marks were very deep. So this was very interesting. Like the skin has been broken. This is not a normal behavior. What we realized later was that this calf had probably had an injury. So here you will notice the red uh, mark, which is blunt force trauma. So it was, we hypothesized, probably caught in a male battle, or there was some injury of that sort. And after a postmortem, we realized that the injury had caused the ruptured lung, and uh, it had scarred. There was scar tissue. So obviously, after the lung rupture, the animal had difficulty breathing. So these scars tell us that the animal was actually helped up by members of its pod. That's why it had managed to survive in spite of a ruptured lung. That shows care by the pod members of an animal that's injured. So it had actually survived in spite of a grievous injury just because it's conspecific care for it. So such a touching tale. Moving on. I mean, we knew where they were, what they do. So we had to figure out how many of these animals there were. And just counting the pods doesn't give us numbers because we could be seeing the same animals over and over again. So how do we know how many animals actually live in this water? So we use the technique called photographic mark recapture, where we use the fins of the dolphins to actually identify them. Now, even when you see these dolphins in the water, some fins are marked clearly. Most adults, because of wear and tear, aging, have marks on their fins. Now, if you see this other animal, which is a calf, is an unmarked fin. You won't be able to tell one calf from the other. So, based on this, if you look at all these fins, for example, they all look different to all of us, right? I mean, you can identify them as animals. So based on this, as individuals, based on this, we identified some 572 individuals. And this is only the 572 individuals that were easy to identify. Generally, in a pod, we also noted the percentage of animals that were calves and unmarked. I'll come to that later. Something interesting you see here is that almost 80% of the sightings, 428 animals, were only sighted once, which tells us that we needed a lot more effort in this data. But I mean, our study ran out. Sometime later, we might pick this back up and get more robust results. Based on these data of the marked fins, we estimate that there are around 720 marked individuals with an error margin of 690 to 750. When we account for the number of calves that we saw across the season, there may be somewhere around 830 to 900 animals in this 120-kilometer stretch of water, which is an astonishingly dense population for a predator this size. Now, this is something called a discovery curve, which tells us how many new animals we found every season. And when you look at this data and collect this data over multiple years, at some point, this curve should flatten. But as you can see in March, April, the curve still hasn't flattened. We needed more effort in this data, but well, our funding ran out and we did some other things after that. Something more interesting to note is if you look at the gray bars, that's the time when we couldn't sample. Yeah. Sorry. The screen is stuck.
Mihir,
Yeah.
start the
Hi.
screen share again if it's stuck.
Okay. Okay.
Shut down the screen share and restart it.
Listen. Yeah, but something's gone wrong with this. When I come here, okay, is this okay? Yeah. Sorry about that. No, still nothing. Yeah. Okay. Fine. It's working now. Sorry for that.
Fine, I guess.
So if you notice it, yeah, yeah, it's back to working. If you notice, during this large gray bands that I've marked out, we could not sample. During monsoon, sometimes we couldn't sample because of bad weather. So we needed to find a better way to get data. Like other than visually looking for dolphins, is there a better way to find them? Dolphins use sonar like bats, and they find their prey using this sound. So could there be a way of using this sound that they continually produce almost to find these dolphins? So we found this equipment called a C-pod, which logs the presence and absence of these marine mammals and tells us that these animals were present for X number of hours or in such densities in an area. This would work for our two target species, the humpback dolphins and finless porpoises. Now, how do we separate these two sounds? Now, humpback dolphins have a very wide range in their clicks. As you can see from this graph, they produce from 20 kilohertz to 160 kilohertz. Now, our hearing is up to here, 20 kilohertz. We wouldn't be able to hear any of these clicks. They're way beyond our hearing range. On the other hand, porpoises produce a very narrow band of sound. It's been hypothesized that the porpoises develop this narrow vocal range to evade predators like orcas. That's just a speculation. But whatever the reason was, it gave us a very good separation point to identify what species were being actually recorded. So we deployed these C-pods in these two areas. One, an area with limited fishing activity, limited tourism. Another area with a high number of tourist boats and a lot of fishing activity. And we wanted to see how these two areas were differently used. We didn't end up deploying at both places for very long because the pod in Devbag, which is to the south, was unfortunately lost during the monsoons, and we never managed to recover it. But as you can see, we see a clear graph of when dolphins and porpoises are present. And this even corroborates what we saw on the water, that these animals are generally not found together. Even on days that they are actually seen together, the more detailed graphs show that the R's are differing when they're present. This kind of data also told us what the dolphins, or in this case porpoises, were doing throughout the day. This is something that we could not have collected visually because we are limited by daylight hours, and we don't know what the dolphins or porpoises do during the night or in the morning before we go for surveys. So these kind of new data were really helping understand different aspects of these animals. Now, we were also using something called a dipping hydrophone, which you can see Isha here putting into the water. It's just a mic which is waterproof and dipped into the water, and we recorded sounds from them. So there are three main kinds of sounds here. One is the clicks, which sound kind of like this. So these clicks, which sound like ticker, have been slowed down so we can hear it. These are very, very high frequency, and these are the echolocation used by dolphins to find prey. Now, when dolphins go very near their prey, they use something called burst pulses, which are clicks which are very, very close to each other. And this is what it sounds like. So that their clicks more frequently produced so that they can find where their prey is and hunt them. Now, dolphins don't generally communicate using these clicks. For that, they use something called whistles. So here you can see at the bottom these long wavy lines in the audiogram. This is how the dolphin whistles sound like. They have also been slowed down so that we can hear them. They sound a little like mice squeaking. So other than these, what other marine mammals occur in this water? We were very surprised when we saw blue whales, and as you can see on the red triangle map on the map, that they were very close to shore, and this was in maybe 15 meters of water. And after this sighting of a blue whale, we saw two individuals. I'll come to that in a bit. We saw another species of whale, which is called the Broodies whale. Now, the blue whale is the largest animal ever to have lived on this planet. They can grow up to 30 meters, like 100 feet in length. But the other one, which is its smaller cousin, a Brody's whale, can grow up to 15 meters, which is still huge. And we saw them about at 8 places, totaling 23 individuals. This was very surprising. I mean, whales don't generally come in such shallow waters because coming to such shallow waters, they risk being stranded, which is a very high risk strategy for them. Especially the fact that we saw all these animals with their calves. Like these Brody's whales that you see here, the one on top is an adult, the one below is a small calf. Like when I say small calf, it was the size of our boat. This one emerged right next to our boat, and we thought, what a giant animal. And then its mother came next to it, and then we realized it was a little baby. Here you can see the characteristics by how we identify the Brody's whale. It has these three ridges on its top, on its top of its head. The other species, as you saw, was the blue whale. What was very interesting was that we saw this animal and then this little fin sticking beside it. We couldn't figure out what it was, and we checked with experts. And then we were told that this was the fin of a baby that was on its side, suckling from its mother. So it was a mother and calf pair that was in such shallow waters. This, as exciting as it was for us, was kind of a worrying trend. I mean, whales will only come in very shallow waters if they have no options for food in deeper waters. So this was a high risk strategy. This was because something was wrong with the ecology of the area. And this was confirmed maybe because a few weeks later, there was a stranding of a blue whale calf in Raigad district in Revdanda. So if you look at the distance, I mean, it's not much for a whale. It's 250 kilometers. If you look at it in body percentage size, it's not a long distance to travel. And when we did examine this calf, she was severely emaciated. The blubber layer on this calf was barely 6 centimeters. Generally, it should be around 20 to 25 centimeters. So this calf had starved, and that's why these animals were coming into shallower waters. So now that we found out so much about these animals, is this like an ideal habitat with no issues? Absolutely not. These dolphins have learned to live with the fisheries, with the area. They actively raid fishing gear and prey from them. And not only is this a problem for the fishermen, the dolphin also get entangled in the gear. Here you see a very young calf that had drowned in a rappan net. Even in some cases, you see like this animal shows a garret, like a dark line around its neck, where it may have been entangled in fishing gear, discarded or actual. But luckily, this animal survived. A lot of adults also show these kind of cuts. The nylon fishing gear can cut through their dolphin fins like butter because these fins are cartilage, very similar to the material of our ear. There's no bone in it, so it can cut through it. So it leaves these kind of marks on these dolphins. The new issue of tourism also was a bit distressing for us because the tourism is largely unregulated. And what we noticed is that in the to get a better picture to show the tourist dolphins from close by, the boat operators approach these dolphins very close by, and often you would see alarming signs like these dolphins splashing their tails on the water, called a tail slap. This is a warning sign for dolphins or other animals to stay away from the dolphins. But for the tourists, it just becomes a nice picture, like the dolphins are playing in the water is what it's interpreted as. So even tourism in these areas in such density had led to dolphins moving away from some of these areas and abandoning good feeding grounds. Now, another interesting personal tale was this dolphin called Floopy. Now, we're not supposed to name our animals. We have alphanumeric codes for them. But, you see these animals day in, day out for so many years of your life, you get attached to them. There's this animal, which, from our estimate, had been cut by a nylon net or a propeller, something like that, and her the top of her fin was bent over. Now, for about the first 1.5 years, we kept seeing this animal alone, and she had her pod with her, and she'd maintain distance from our boat. We could never get good pictures. But I don't know, at some point, this animal started trusting us. And as you can see from this picture, she started approaching really close to the boat. And one day we saw a calf with her, and the calf must have been about a year or so older. So for all those months that we were seeing her, we couldn't see her calf because she kept it protected from this boat by keeping it on the other side of her, very much like an elephant mom would do by keeping the calf between her legs. So at some point, she trusted this boat enough to come close and show us her calf. We were so touched. Now that we know how many animals are there, we had to get an idea of what the population trend would be. Like, if we know the animals and we have a general idea of how many calves there are in the population, we need to know how many animals there are dying. Now, these dolphins being very shallow water residents, how do we get this data? Their carcasses generally stand on the beach. So the answer was citizen science. We had to get the local communities involved. So we did talks in local temples, in all the places that would get. We talked to the locals about our work and asked them to report any carcasses to us. We just caught up with people on the street and told them about our work. We printed some informational material, some booklets, some posters, and distributed them in a lot of the villages. Sometimes we just did some impromptu talks from the back of the car. And we use this platform, the Marine Mammals of India website. Please go check it out, where we log this data and make it available for anyone to download. Uh, and there are the data has been collected from papers and personal records. So we've been using this as a platform to log these sightings and make all these data available to the public. Please do go check it out. So our networking started paying dividends. We started getting reports of carcasses. If we were around, we would go visit the carcasses. Otherwise, people would get us pictures of the carcasses. Sometimes we would get samples. We worked with the forest department to educate ground staff on how to collect data properly from these carcasses. And I mean, why is it so important to get data on these carcasses? I mean, you saw this whole presentation. It's very difficult to get data on marine mammals. You have to go in the water. We are terrestrial beings. Being out on the water is difficult. And we only see them briefly when they come to the surface. But from carcasses, we get DNA, we get stomach content analysis, we get actual lengths, which you can't get on the water. I mean, for no other reason would you see researchers so happy standing next to a stinky carcass. It gives us really good data to build. I mean, from one carcass, it was very interesting. Other than that, we have done very little work in deeper waters. But even animals that live off our shores sometimes strand into shallower waters. And based on these network of informants, we found 9 other species, other than the 4 that I reported about, that were stranded on our coastline. So we know about the biodiversity of our waters, even if it's just the species record from these networks. And that's how important these data collection methods are. So based on these data, I mean, what do we do now? Isha, who you saw earlier dipping the hydrophone, works with IISER Tirupati and Cornell University. And she's working on acoustics and behavior of dolphins. So she looks at what kind of sounds are produced during what kind of behavior. So here on top, you see that the dolphins are socializing. That's why they produce a lot more whistles. As I told you, whistles are something that the dolphins use to communicate with each other. Below, you will see all these clicks. This is a recording from these dolphins when they were seen looking for food. So generally, they're only producing clicks and looking for prey in these scenarios. ESA is also looking for new ways of using sound to count animals. So she uses something called a towed array, which is multiple hydrophones, that is microphones under the water, towed behind the boat, while she also does visual surveys. So here you can see from the map that the number of animals seen are much lesser than the number of animals recorded. Because say, for example, animals like finless porpoise, which are very difficult to see in the water, but can be recorded by a hydrophone. So these are newer techniques that we are using to refine our data and find out more about these species. Another colleague of ours, Ketki Zog, works with James Cook University now in Townsville in Australia. She's doing her PhD on dolphin and fisher interactions, specifically the humpback dolphins along the Sindhudurg coastline. So she's looking at direct interactions, which is when a dolphin gets entangled in a net, it's called bycatch. And when a dolphin steals fish from a fisherman's gear, it's called depredation. She's looking at what is the scale and impact of this. Because the fisheries sector along our coastline is largely unregulated, these data have to be collected on ground. She's looking at the frequencies of these interactions, the impacts of these interactions on the dolphins vis-a-vis bycatch, and the impacts on the livelihood of the fishers, which is damage to gear, catch loss. And based on these, she plans to inform management measures on conservation strategies to avoid bycatch or to mitigate bycatch. Our advisor, Dipani Sutaria, who's also with James Cook University, is currently working on the Arabian Sea humpback whales. She's working for the International Whaling Commission for this project, and she's doing interview surveys with fishermen. She's doing vessel-based surveys, and as we did, making networks across the coastline with fishermen to get information about humpback whales. She's also been deploying this instrument called a sound trap, which records whale sounds remotely, and then she collects it from underwater once every few months to look at if there are any recordings of whale song. There have been quite a few. And there is a lot of interesting information about whales that has come up, and we get reports of stranding from these data. And she's been making this network along the entire West Coast. Here you see a temple which is dedicated to the humpback whale in Gujarat. I'll also talk briefly about my work. I work in the Center for Ecological Sciences in IISc in Bangalore, and I'm currently working on the genetics of the humpback dolphins. My project largely is along the entire coast of India, but the Maharashtra part of this work has been supported by the Mangrove Foundation. So I'm mapping the occurrence of these dolphins. I'm looking at expanding the existing network to tell us about carcasses, tell us about sightings, and to collect tissue from these carcasses, because I'm working on the genetics of these animals. With this tissue, I plan to examine the population structure, connectivity, how whether these populations are fragmented, what is the genetic richness of these populations. All these things can help in conservation measures for these dolphins. I've also been trying to use genetics to identify what species some carcasses are when they're too degraded to identify morphologically. So based on all this, how can you help us? We'd be very happy if you go check out the Marine Mammals of India website. There are a lot of active WhatsApp groups that we rely on to get stranding data. Feel free to get in touch with us, or me in this case. Please take the email or the number and tell us about sightings and strandings, or if you have any questions. I would really like to thank a lot of people. This project went on for 3 years almost, and it literally took a village to get all this data. So I'd like to thank all the people that were involved directly, indirectly, and our funders for this study. Thank you. Questions, please.
Thank you so much, Mir. It was really a
Yeah.
interesting session, especially your experiences on field. Uh, all the participants, I request you to please post your question in the chat box so that Mimir can answer them.
So I have not worked on Gangetic dolphins at all, and the Gangetic dolphins are largely freshwater dolphins, so they won't be along the coast. They will be in the river. So there are two species now, one in the Indus River and one in the Ganges River. So they won't be found in along the coastline of West Bengal. Yeah. So, to work on marine mammal conservation in India, I guess, I mean, we got our masters in zoology or uh, oceanography, and a large part of it is to volunteer with these studies. I mean, we had a lot of volunteers work with us. You have to realize that it's a lot of hard work, and you have to find out whether you enjoy doing this or not. So, I mean, right now we are not running any project where you can volunteer with, but check the website, get in touch with other researchers. The only way to find out whether you like doing this or not is trying it a few times. Uh, Next question. Is there any relationship between humpback whales and humpback dolphins? Not really, no. It's just that both of them have fins that are uh, that look like a hump. That's why the name. And you know that's why we don't take common names too seriously. They just take one specific character and give the name to it. No, they're not related. How often do you see orcas around Maharashtra? Actually, there have been two reports that I know of. They were very recent. Uh, so, other than that, I don't know. But we have very few surveys done in deeper waters along the Maharashtra coast. So maybe they're found more often, but we don't know about them. And orcas that you would find in these waters would be transient. So the chances are that they would be very infrequent visitors. There have been multiple sightings of orcas in Goa, and not that it's different waters, so they might be there in the waters of Maharashtra also. Uh, any species belonging to marine mammals dominate the water as we being mammals dominate the land. I don't agree with that fact. I think ants outnumber us, but yeah, that's not something which is a very scientific way of looking at something dominating some habitat. I'm sorry, I'm going to skip that. Is there any data for dolphin trade in India? There isn't any trade on dolphins in India that I know of. Uh, most of the cases, these dolphins are accidentally entangled. They are not a target catch. And yes, very far back in the 60s, till the 60s, dolphins used to be hunted for their blubber. That was to waterproof boats. But with fiberglass boats and cheaper vegetable alternatives, they don't really do that anymore. Uh, yeah, Saile's question, which is how do you identify male and female dolphins? It's very difficult. So unless you see the underbelly of the dolphin, you can't identify them. You identify them based on the width of the genital slit and other characters like that. But on the On the water, we generally just assume that the animals with the calves are females. That is just a sociobiological thing because that has been proved in many of these dolphin species. So we assume it, but we're not 100% sure. Can we humans communicate with dolphins? Well, depends on what your idea of communication is. Uh, but yeah, I don't think so. How tourism affects cetaceans? What could be done about that? So most of the times, the noise of the engines affects dolphin communication, and more than that, uh, in cases where dolphins are foraging and these boats come very close, they get disrupted from feeding and they move away. So having guidelines like maintaining a certain distance or having a cutoff on the number of boats uh, can really help with reducing the effect of tourism on these dolphins. So it's just responsible tourism rather than tourism itself that would be, I mean, it's not like all tourism is bad, but it's unregulated tourism that is bad. Yeah. Uh, okay. Any effects of LED fishing on cetaceans? Yeah. So Rohit's question, not direct effect because I don't really know if anyone's looked at it, but obviously LED fishing leads to, local depletions of fish stock. So it's going to have a secondary effect that the prey base of these fish, of these mammals, is going to be depleted, or it can be anywhere along the chain. So the LED fishing may not actually catch the prey that these dolphins are feeding on, but they might catch the prey of those species, or they might disrupt the food chain in other ways. Uh, Best colleges or institute to pursue bachelor's, master's in zoology. Wow, I can't tell you that. I mean, I've been out of touch. I did my master's 10 years ago. Things have changed since then. Maybe you can check with someone who's passed out more recently. Sorry. Okay. Am I still not audible?
You're audible, me.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody put it in there.
Yeah, it might be the
Uh,
issue at his place, the internet issue.
Yeah. Are dolphins migratory? So the ones that we are studying are not migratory, but there are certain species of cetaceans that migrate long distance, like humpback whale. So it doesn't really depend on the species. It depends from population to population. So there are humpback whales which migrate to colder waters to feed and then warmer waters for calving. So different whales have different migratory routes. Even populations show different routes. But in our understanding, neither the humpback dolphin nor the finless porpoise migrate. Uh, wait,
So, Mihir,
Gujarat,
we will be
we,
taking the
yeah,
last question for today.
yes, okay,
Hello? Yeah.
all right.
So, I guess
Yes,
the
yes,
Gujarat beach wala was the last question.
yes. I'm at Gujarat beach. They say if you sound louder, so dolphins get nearer to the boat. Is that right? I mean, I don't know. It might also be true because these dolphins are quite curious. So they do get attracted to boats sometimes because they associate fishing boats with food. So that might be the reason. Yeah. All right. That's it, right?
So,
The last question.
yes, thank you so much, Mihir. Thank you so much, all the participants. Mihir sir already have given his email ID in the chat box, so you can post your questions to him directly. Now, I would like to request our Joint Director, Ms. Meenu Somaraj, BCF Mangrove Cell, to express her thought about today's session. Welcome, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah, Sally, thank you. I hope that I'm audible to all of you. Um, yeah, oh, hello, hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I audible to you, Sally? Yes, yes. Okay, okay.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you,
ma'am.
Sally.
You're
So, really, yeah, well, I must say that this is a very good beginning of the, celebrating Wildlife Week this year by introducing this topic, the cetaceans of Maharashtra. By Mr. Mihir Sule. He is associated with the Mangrove Foundation for long. And as it was mentioned in the introductory remarks, that this Wildlife Week is being celebrated to connect with all people. To know, to understand more about the wildlife, and fortunately or unfortunately, many times, terrestrial animals and terrestrial wildlife get more attention compared to marine life. But anyway, due to the persistent and collective effort of Mangrove Cell, Mangrove Foundation, and various research organizations, NGOs like KCRT, and even researchers like Mr. Mihir. So we could somehow keep this topic afloat always, and connect with the people and make them understand about the importance of these species in keeping our marine resources very much healthy and more sustainable to all of us. So, Mihir, I must congratulate you, and let me thank you for having such an insightful lecture on the cetaceans, especially their feeding behaviors, which and even their other characteristics which you could observe during your study period. So, and I hope that these knowledge would definitely help us to draw a better conservation strategies along the Maharashtra coast, at least for conserving these species. So thank you very much to you, and I hope that we will be having more association in future. And all the best for your studies on the genetic parameters of the cetaceans. Thank you very much, Mihir, and also your
Yes,
organizations, and also, thank you, Saili and Mangrove Foundation for organizing such a wonderful webinar today. Thank you all.
thank you. It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun giving this talk. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mihir. At the end of the session, I would like to thank our officials for supporting and encouraging us, as well to all the participants for attending and posting such a great and interesting questions for today's session. Lastly, I would like to request you all to please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. You have our social handles on your screen. Also, recently we have launched our website, so please have a look at it and have a good day. Thank you so much.